In this tutorial I'm going to be looking into a technique that involves using the layer system to force looping animations. In this sequence we have a character doing a backflip, and one thing we may notice is that the pose at the end of the sequence is different from the pose at the end, at the start. So at the start of the sequence the right foot is in front of the left foot, and at the end the feet are next to each other. So if we wish to make this animation perfectly looping, we need to fix this issue. So, firstly we're going to start by looking at the layer system and some functionality that is built into it. One thing you may be aware of is that when working with the layer system, if you add a new layer to our character, the character's current pose is stored in that new layer. So if I click on the available slot here and add a new absolute layer, that new absolute layer stores the pose of the character at that frame. So this new layer is not animated, but it stores the character's pose at the frame when we added the layer. So if we disable this new layer, our character goes back to doing his backflip. And if we re-enable it, it jumps back to that pose. So one handy feature in our layer system is the ability to redump the pose of the character at any point in time into the available layer. So if we look at this animation, at this pose frame here, we can redump that pose into the new layer by simply disabling the new layer and pressing the dump pose button. This button copies the pose from the result of the current layer stack into that new layer. The layer that we wish to dump the pose into has to be disabled for this feature to work. If we press this button now and re-enable this layer, the character stays in that pose. So we can do this at any point in the animation to copy poses from one point in the animation to another. So what I'm going to do is go to frame 0 and dump frame 0's pose into our new layer. If we re-enable new layer, our character stays static. And then the next thing I'm going to do is create a ghost transform gizmo for this layer. This ghost transform gizmo allows me to move and rotate the results of just this layer. So I can grab this whole layer, using the world axis, move it back in the y-axis. Now if I re-disable this layer and have a look at our backflip, he ends up standing over here, but with a different pose than the one we'd like him to end on. So if I re-enable this layer, we can see this is the pose we really want him to end on, and that's the pose he's currently in. So what we want to do is copy the pose from this new layer onto the backflip layer, and we do this simply by disabling the backflip layer. Then we turn on the auto key button so keyframes are created, and press the dump pose button. Now if we re-enable the backflip layer and disable the new layer, our character's pose is static. That's because the pose has been copied from new layer onto backflip layer. There's a few artifacts to do with this, and that involves the feet sliding into position. So if we select the left foot and select the backflip layer, we can see the foot hits the ground at frame 93 and then slides over it until frame 150. So to fix this slide, I'm going to grab the pose at frame 150, just holding down the shift button, shift clone these keys back onto frame 93. Now I'm going to do the same with the right foot, grab the keyframe at frame 150, holding down the shift key, copy those keys onto frame 93. Now if we look at this animation, the pose at the end of the sequence is exactly the same as the pose at the start of the sequence. Here we've forced a perfectly looping animation, simply using our layer stack. If we re-enable the new layer, we can use this ghost transform gizmo to move, rotate, and transform the layer in a lot of different ways. So this can be a very useful feature for working with looped animations. Once we're happy with our results, we can simply discard the new layer, and what we have left is our backflip layer.